Art should always be accessible. Music, painting and dance, films, poetry, podcasts and stories. These are the things which allow us to express ourselves, to be free, accepted, loved. These are the things which make life under capitalism bearable. Art should always be accessible. That's why Stories from the Hearth will always be free to listen to. However, as a small independent project, it is not free to make. If you are finding value in my art, whatever shape that value may take for you, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform where you can directly support artists and creators you like with your hard-earned cash. It cuts out the bullshit, the middlemen of capitalism, and allows creatives like me to connect directly with the people enjoying their work, like you. But Patreon also allows me to give you something back for your support. To get access to every episode a week early, bonus monthly mini-stories, behind-the-scenes content, shout-outs, personalised commissions, and, of course, my eternal thanks, go to patreon.com/Stories from the Hearth podcast, or hit the link in the description down below. Welcome to Stories from the Hearth, the podcast for tall tales and fantastical fiction. Short stories the likes of which you might once have heard a wandering bard tell to a group of villagers gathered around the fire. Explore the history of storytelling in mid-month mini-series, and then, on the last Sunday of the month, escape your surroundings with a brand new story written and performed by me, Callum Bannerman. Historical, romantic, science fiction or fantasy, these are tales to transport you, doorways into another world. A quick shout out and thank you to my top tier patrons, Ruthie and Mully. Your support warms my soggy little heart. This month's story is a Halloween special designed to curdle your blood, chill your spine and stand your hairs on end. It's based in a Scottish legend, that of the Selkie. And if you've listened to my special bonus episode, which I released earlier this month, The Merwife of Shetland, then you are in some way prepared. And yet, could anything prepare you to the horrors within? This is episode 14, The Selkie of Beinn na mich Caillte. Happy Halloween. Light from the window of the bothy fell as would candlelight from a cracked lantern. Spilling through narrow stonework, it cut a weak shard across the moorland, dead heather and compact pockets of last winter's snaw shying from the luminescence. Where the light petered out, the loch began. Sleek as sealskin, the surface of the water was dark and oily, a thin film of scum discolouring its edges. The loch, known to those few locals who had the misfortune of neighbouring it, was nameless. It was bad luck, they warned, to name such a place. Instead, the shepherds, drovers and crofters, who had at times slept in the bothy, simply called the murky waters his hame. Provided you understood you were trespassing on his land, it was said you might still pass the night in peace. Charlie prodded at the logs, crackling and popping in the grate, with a fractured antler he'd found on the hike earlier that day. Casually, he threw another log on the fire, and when it caught ablaze, leaned in close to relight the half-extinguished joint hanging from his lips. "Here, watch yourself, you fucking clown," laughed his girlfriend, Nadia, from the corner. "I didn't want my new cake smelling a burnt fucking beard." Charlie smirked. "Well, it's quicker than shaving," he replied dryly. This earned a few chuckles from those around the room, not too wigged out by the heady combination of mushrooms, marijuana, and wee Maggie's latest ghost story. As the laughter died and a sighing wind sank its fingers into the crumbling mortar of the group's lodgings, Maggie continued. "You see, long before the bothy was left to the mercy of the elements, long before it was even built, centuries before the folk wandering this dark, mulchy corner of the world spoke English, before they spoke Gaelic even, back when those who lived close by spoke a strange, long-forgotten language, when they painted themselves in woad and kenned the land intimately, even back then, this place was already home to a much more ancient creature. The crofters of 100 years ago didn't invent the phrase, his hame, of course. They borrowed it from generations of folk who had come before, who had, in turn, learned that they, no matter how deeply attached to the land they might be, were but trespassers when on the shores of the loch. In the lee of the mountain called Beinn Caillte, his hame has sat untouched and unchanged since time began. No streams enter it, nor burns, nor rivers, and none leave. If the loch is fed by anything other than rainwater, then it shows no signs, for its waters are as stagnant and deathly as the stories which surround it. And yet, its surface does not go unbroken. Though no fish nor eels dwell here, there is one being which makes this loch its hame. I say being, for this is no animal, no human either. It is a leftover from days when the world was smaller and fuller of magic. Davy, closely examining the palm of his right hand as its lines swirled and breathed, snorted. Maggie accepted the joint from Charlie, still by the fire, and took a long, deep drag. As she held the smoke in her lungs, she fixed her gaze on a point just over Davy's shoulder and cocked an eyebrow. She exhaled the purplish plume and took another quick hit before offering the spliff up to Davy. Davy, a big bastard with a beer belly stretching his Berghaus jacket, joiner's trousers tucked into socks tucked into Timberland boots, epitomising a particular brand of Scottish outdoorsman, leaned forward from his seat to take the joint. Just before his fingers could brush the sculpted paper, however, Maggie jerked her hand back, holding the thing just out of the big man's reach. "Oh, come on, you fuck," moaned Davy. "Who here believes in magic?" said Maggie, a wry smile on her face. She brandished the joint aloft, and the last member of the party, a timid tourist who they'd met earlier that day near the summit of the mountain, piped up. "Yeah, over here." "Ha ha!" laughed Maggie. "Good man, Luca." And saying so, she half passed, half chucked the joint across the room. Luca the German jumped skittishly out of the way of the missile, much to the amusement of his companions. He picked up the spliff from the floor, blew the dust from it, and toked. "Magic," he said, his thick accent all the thicker for the settling smoke. The room rattled with laughter, and Maggie noticed from the corner of her eye that even the snubbed Davy couldn't help but grin. She went on with her story. When the world was smaller and fuller of magic, there were races of beings who we might think of as being halfway evolved, half human, half animal. It was from one of these races that the being of Beinn Caillte came from. The thing which made its home in the loch was a Selkie. Maggie let the word fill the air of the bothy, suppressing a smile as the wind hissed and slithered in under the door, as if emphasizing her point. The Selkie of Beinn na Mic Caillte, though, is not just a Selkie, for even Selkies must mate and breed, travel and change, live and die. No, the Selkie of Beinn na Mic Caillte is said to have once been a king among Selkies. That is, until, in the time before Scotland was Alba, he was disgraced, dethroned, and made an outcast. Of course, no one kens for sure exactly why he was, but rumours abound. According to legend, this king of the Selkies grew old and greedy. Life at sea and in Scotland's estuaries began to bore him, and he grew jealous when his womenfolk took human lovers. Worse still, he grew angry when human lovers took them, stealing their sealskin so that they could not return to the waters and to their king. This particular Selkie, so the story goes, decided to turn the tables on the upper world, and in time developed a taste for human flesh. His kind banished him for this gruesome malfeasance, and ever since he's eked out an existence in the loch in the shadow of Beinn na Mic Caillte, the loch right outside this very bothy, surviving only on the human victims foolish enough to stumble across his path. The bothy to which Maggie referred was a single-room cabin built of stone and mortar, once thatched but now sporting a roof of crumbling slate. It looked like the kind of house a child would draw if asked to. 2 Latin cross windows either side of a door, old, wooden, and flush with the stone. Inside, huddled round the hearth's single source of light and heat, were 4 friends and a stranger. The stranger, Luca Dietrich, we've already mentioned, was met earlier that day near the summit of the mountain. The friends, on the other hand, were a disparate group, but all the closer for it. They were joined, as they say, at the hip. The group had met in Glasgow, variously attending college, university, being from the city itself or having escaped there for reasons plainly obvious to the group. They had come to Glasgow from all 4 corners of Scotland. To look at them was to see such unique characters you'd never in your life have put them together. And yet, whilst the pictures they presented of themselves seemed to clash quite violently, their experiences, the lives they held within had, without a doubt, been cut from the same cloth. All 4 of the friends had grown up poor, surrounded by small, insular communities which promoted or suffered from bigotry in one form or another. All 4 had been drawn to nature from an early age, the hills, moors and forests of their native land offering some reprieve, some sanctuary from the council estates, tenement streets, or desolate, forgotten villages they called home. And all 4 had sought an escape from that life, from the prejudices and the small-mindedness which clawed and dragged and tugged at their heels, which tainted their every meal and filled their throats with a claggy, unyielding weight, which fogged their minds and, worst of all, suppressed their pursuits of self, to which each of them had always strove. Arriving in Glasgow, Scotland's largest city, with its red brick buildings, grey and rain-dashed streets, and never-finished construction works, they had, once the novelty had washed off, experienced a keen desolation. But then, as if by fate, they had met each other, and their lives had changed for the better. The group had met in an ancient pub called the Old Toll Bar, one Christmas Eve. Davy, born and bred in that great hulking town, yet equally sequestered to his own small pocket of it, called the Old Toll his local. The others had flitted there by chance, seeking shelter from the sleet. With exceedingly cheap pints of stout on tap and some decent music on the jukebox, the rest as they say, was history. Now, as Maggie, the eccentric queer with the weird Shetlandic accent, brought her strange and unnerving story to a close, she saw that the ramshackle bothy was full, as the old toll bar had been all those years ago, with friends. On their faces, Davy, Nadia and Charlie wore bemused smiles. Only Luca the stranger carried the fearful expression which Maggie felt her tale deserved. Presently, the German coughed through the last of the joint and offered it to the room. Big Davy polished off the dregs of a tinny and crumpled it in one massive hand. He stood up, stretching and cracking, and marched over to the skinny blonde.
"I'll take that there, pal, danke schön."
Then, turning to Maggie, he said,
"Aye then, Mags, you've brought us on a mad hike up the back arse of the Highlands to stay a night in a haunted bothy. Fucking bro!"
Davy's laugh startled poor Luca even further, and Maggie rolled her eyes. "It's no haunted, you idiot. Haunted would imply a ghost story, and my story's no a ghost story." Charlie, still staring transfixed into the belly of the fire, as his drug-addled brain contorted the flames and sparks, animating Maggie's story in rich orange and furious white, spoke without breaking concentration.
"Moan, Mags, have you gone soft in the head?"
he snorted.
"He didn't really believe all that guff, did he?"
Nadia poked her boyfriend in the side, her subtle gesture immediately lost beneath Charlie's melodramatic yowl.
"Ah! What did he do that for?"
he exclaimed.
"Just wished, would ye?"
replied Nadia.
"No need to take the piss. I wasn't it."
But Charlie's protests were silenced with another jab to the ribs. Davy, still standing next to the quietly observant German, put an intoxicated arm around the boy's shoulders. Luca visibly strained under the weight.
"So, what do you make of this, my European friend?"
slurred Davy, in a dialect as close to proper English as he could make it. Luca Dietrich stood about 6 or 7 inches taller even than Big Davy for Ibrox. He wore his hair in a mess of golden curls, wound tightly to his scalp, but wildly assembled all the same. A cut which would have looked clumsy and unkempt on anyone else. The rest of him, however, made up for the unruliness of his locks. He was clean-shaven, his skin smooth and unblemished, no spots nor visible scars, and his cheekbones were high and pronounced. His lips were thin, contrasting eyes a little larger than average, with piercing irises, Aryan blue and unreadable, sat between fluttering sets of fair and fine eyelashes. Luca wasn't particularly muscular, but he was evidently fit, his unbranded hiking gear hugging slender limbs and a belly free of fat. His hands were milk white against the blue of his knitted jumper, veins of a similar blue readily visible between the taut and bony knuckles. Between his fingers the skin grew thinly, yet more abundantly than normal, rising almost to the middle knuckle between digits. All in all, a textbook example of what unworldly Scotsman Davy Crooks thought of when he thought of a German. The room had grown quiet, anticipating Luca's response. The lad's eyes betrayed a slight lag between the hearing and comprehension of Davy's question, but after a while, he answered. "Well, I think Maggie tells a very good story. Certainly, I would not wish to encounter this... How did you call it?"
"Selkie,"
answered the room. "Yeah, Selkie. It sounds quite unpleasant," continued Luca, his tone considered and respectful. "How does your Selkie look like, Megs? May I call you Megs?" "Of course you may, pal," answered Maggie, wearing a proud grin. She turned to the rest of the room. "At least someone around here appreciates a good story." "Selkies, Luca? Hell, that's a good question. You see, Selkies can take any number of forms, especially this Selkie. Mostly they look like seals, right? When they're in the water, out to sea or in a loch or a river or whatever, They just look like seals. In fact, you can hardly tell a Selkie and a seal apart until they step on land."
"And he ken this how?"
piped up Charlie, earning another rib prod from Nadia, whose only major complaint about her boyfriend was his incessant need to bicker with her best pal.
"I told you, Chaza man, I've been here before."
Charlie laughed.
"Oh, so you've seen him, have ye? This Selkie king?" "I'm just trying to tell ma,"
began Maggie, but her simmering frustrations were soothed before they had time to boil, thanks to an interjection from the German.
"What happens then?"
Maggie shot Charlie a triumphant look.
"Well, whenever a Selkie steps onto land, they're forced to shed their skin. Their seal skin, that is. At which point they tack on the skin of a man or woman."
As the mushrooms and marijuana seeped deeper into Maggie's bloodstream, her native Shetland dialect started cropping up more and more. Stoned but not oblivious, Maggie caught the struggled look in Luca's narrowing eyes. She cleared her throat and shook herself a little, like a wet dog emerging from the sea.
"Sorry, pal. What I mean to say is that a Selkie is forced to tack on the appearance of a human when they step on dry land. Most Selkies, given they are half man, half beastie, have their own human likeness like. But not this Selkie. Like I told you earlier, this Selkie was banished by his folk. Well, legend has it that when he was banished, they took his human skin frae him, in an attempt to confine him to the water for all eternity, so as he could never again trouble human folk. Problem is,
Maggie stopped to sip from her water bottle. The water tasted to her like liquid crystal, the microscopic bubbles bursting on her tongue like a causeway at high tide. Her eyes grew wide as she pulled the bottle away from her to inspect its contents. The water inside sloshed and swirled like ocean waves. She gyrated the bottle in her hand, forming a mini whirlpool inside, and laughed euphorically. Charlie, the only seasoned user in the room, grinned despite himself.
"Everything just tastes better, eh, Margs?"
he said, chuckling. By his side, Nadia relaxed a little. Maggie shook herself again in the same canine fashion and searched for the frayed end of her story. Luca, who was sober but for a few puffs of the joint, reminded her of her place.
Right, aye. Thanks, Luca. Problem is, those who banished him hadn't taken into consideration the curiosity of people. Left alone, the Selkie of Beinn Caillte might well have lived a sad, solitary life and died in the waters of the loch. Problem is, he wasn't left alone. Pardon moi. That's French, Margs. Oh, shut it, Charlie. You see, no matter how many terrible tales have been told about this place, people continue to come here. Just look at us, here, despite it all. Aye, shite. Here because you dragged us all kicking and screaming, Maggie, you absolute nonce, protested Davy. Ho, Davy, my man, chirped up Nadia. Enough of the nonce patter, eh? She's a dyke, no a pedo. Pansexual, corrected Maggie. And I don't think you should be using terms like, we're sound with whatever, interrupted Nadia. Ken, whatever your sexuality nagging is, Luca pal? Then, turning to Charlie with a wink, there's some German for you, son.
Luca looked utterly perplexed, all the more confused for the sudden inclusion of the German for sexual proclivity, breaking up a barrage of nonsensical Scots.
"Waste yous!" shouted Maggie.
"Ye didn't think I'd have brought ye here if I didn't think it was safe, do ye?" The group looked unconvinced.
Anyways, Luca, as I was saying, the problem is that the Selkie wasn't left alone. There was always someone too curious not to come here after hearing his story. So, Before long, he'd gathered a fine wardrobe of human skin. Pictish warriors, Irish priests, Roman centurions, peasants, farmers, English reavers, boys, men, old men, proddies, fenians, wandering poets, landowners, Jacobites, Covenanters, the odd pissed-up junkie on a soul-searching hiking trip, their train bound out to the bottom of Leith Walk.
Charlie snorted approvingly at the reference. Big Davy took a second, then another, then finally laughed, so loudly he caused Luca to jump.
"Oh, like trains?"
he began.
"Yes, Davy," said Maggie, cutting him off. "Like train spotting. So, you see, Luca, he's got all manner of skins, o' men who were stupid enough to cross his path. Some of the skins are too old now to wear without arousing suspicion. He's a clever bastard, mind, a king of his kind. Some of them have just outgrown his tastes in fashion, though still he keeps them around, weighted to the bottom of the loch by the bones of their previous occupiers. Fact of the matter is, Luca, mine Freund, there's nae way of knowing what the Selkie of Beinn Caillte will look like from one day to the next. His disguises are how he's evaded capture all these years, how he lures his victims, makes them feel safe and sound before he nabs their birthday suits."
Maggie laughed at her own joke.
"Rumour has it, he likes the feel of foreign flesh the best."
Luca, rolling another joint, stopped. He looked down at the half-crafted spliff, wondering suddenly whether sharing another smoke with this bunch of tripping Scots was such a good idea, after all. Big Davy tightened his hold around the German's shoulders.
"Ho, Mags, no on, man. You're scaring the poor lad. Christ on a bike, man. You're scaring me."
Maggie looked from Davy to Charlie to Nadia, then back to Davy and Luca.
"Aye, come on, Mags," said Nadia. "Let's just enjoy the trip, eh?"
Her face, framed by a dark green hijab, chosen specifically to match her hiking outfit, betrayed more than just a sincere desire to carry on with the hallucinogenic journey. As Mag studied the face of her best friend, she worried that perhaps she had pushed the story just a little too far. Charlie, seasoned tripper and Maggie skeptic though he was, also looked disconcerted. Charlie Moffat was of the short and plump variety, his ginger hair the colour of carrots, his eyes the green of carrot tops. Though not conventionally attractive, he had an air about him, a dry wit and a confidence of character, not flashy, just self-assured, which nevertheless made him quite pretty in the right eyes. As it happened, Nadia Jalal had such a set of eyes. They made an intriguing couple. Nadia, a brash Ayrshire lass born to Iranian migrants, strikingly handsome, with small chestnut eyes and one hell of an arse, and Charlie, native of a small, very white, very rural town in the Scottish borders, with a doughy body currently a deep shade of lobster, a scraggly beard hiding a double chin, which was threatening to find a third if he wasn't more careful with the Jaffa Cakes and iron brew, and no arse worth mentioning. The disparity between the couple could be most succinctly summarised by Big Davy's signature catchphrase.
"I canna fucking wait to see the nick of your bairns, man."
It was the group's firm belief that when Davy said this, he was probably picturing a ginger newborn in a burqa, presumably believing that women of Arabic heritage knitted their children baby-sized hijab in the womb. Sensing that his girlfriend's trip was taking a turn for the paranoid, Charlie spoke up.
"Right, enough of this ghost story pish. It's about that time of the night to go on and have a look at the stairs, I think. Trust is, if you've never seen the stairs on Mushies, you're in for a right treat." "Sounds good, Charlie, my boy,"
agreed Davy, vocalising the accord of his nodding companions. As the fire roared, tension in the cabin began to dissipate. Lifting themselves gradually out of their various states of inebriation, the group began to slip back into half-dried walking boots. pulling on knitted bonnets and applying the requisite mosquito repellent as they did. For those who had indulged, the psychedelic mushrooms had begun the climb towards their zenith, and the buttery firelight on the walls seemed to radiate warmth and goodwill. Outside, an owl hooted, and the friends laughed, as if that sound was the funniest thing in the world. Nadia even laughed until she was buckled over, which got Charlie going. The rest fell like dominoes. Big Davy Fiebrox took a long swig from his bottle of tonic, and then held it in the air, like William Wallace brandishing the head of the Sheriff of Lanark. "Oh," he said, barely containing his giggles. "Buckfast makes you fuck fast." The eyes of the company glistened with tears of mirth, and even Luca, though not tripping, thought the stupid wordplay hilarious. As the laughter faded, the friends finished readying themselves for their trip outside, and in their minds began dreaming of how wonderful the stars were going to look. It was then that there came a knock at the door. "Nope, no a fucking chance," proclaimed Davy, prizing the tentative mollusk of silence from its rock with a voice like a diver's knife. Nadia elbowed the big man in the ribs, her furrowed brows telling him to shut up, her forehead dappled with sweat. Charlie's brows travelled to meet his hairline, his eyes wide and his pupils wider. He squeezed Nadia's hand and stubbed out the latest in a succession of joints on the stonework of the bothy's windowsill. Maggie Skellister dropped her jaw to the ground. To her, the knocks at the door had rippled through the room in visible waves, like those left by a pebble skimmed across water. She watched the last of them now as two lines collided in the corner and echoed back along the wall. As they passed over and through her, her eyebrows undulated in rhythm, and she thought that in that moment she knew exactly who was stood on the other side of the door. Luca Dietrich, straw blonde brows knitting toward each other as he attempted to make sense of the terror gripping his present company, said rather loudly, "Guys, are we not going to answer that?" Luca's question was met with a chorus of angry, fearful eyes. Once more, there came 3 knocks at the door. Nadia could hear the thud of her heart, the thrum of blood as it coursed through her ears. "Deutschland, you silly bastard," scorned Davy, barely louder than the whispering wind. "Just a bad trip, darling. You're just tripping," whispered Charlie to Nadia, her head buried in his shoulder. But her boyfriend's voice was missing its usual self-assurance. Maggie, on the other hand, found that she was not in the least bit scared. In fact, the sound waves of the beckoning knock felt to her warm, like a dram of whiskey in the dead of winter, or the succulent heat of summer sun on Scottish skin. Before she knew what she was doing, she was on her feet, her hand outstretched toward the piece of string which sufficed for a door handle. Davy blocked her way. "You high?" he asked. Maggie just smiled and went to push past him. Davy stepped in front of her again, this time gripping her bicep with all the inhuman strength of a man raised on fritter rolls, pizza crunches and tonic. Maggie, red-headed and imbued with the characteristic fieriness of her ginger kinfolk, met Davy's physicality with an uncommon calmness. She took the big man's wrist between thumb and forefinger and spoke gently. "You're not really scared of a ghost story, are you, Crooks?" Her question was calculated, teasing in a manner quite unlike her. Davy, intelligent but less emotionally astute than the average man, which isn't saying a lot, cycled slowly through a few possible retorts. Maggie watched as his face betrayed each thought. Eventually, stumped, he released his grip on Maggie's arm and stood aside. His pals, Charlie and Nadia, could do nothing but look on, gobsmacked, frozen in place. As if in a dream, it seemed to Maggie that the door to their small abode pulsated with light. The light of evening sun on a changing tide, of an aquarium's observation room, dark but for those marching quarter notes of gold. As there came another knock at the door, she heard the sound as if it were muffled, underwater. She saw it, too, the impression of the visitor's mitt somehow visible on her side of the doorframe. Gliding to the door, Maggie took hold of the fading green string and pulled. The swollen wood of the door scraped noisily through the grooves long worn into the stone of the floor. Light from the bothy spilled roaring into the night and met the silhouette of a sunken figure standing in the doorway. The bothy's residence stood transfixed. The thing in the doorway drew its cloaks about itself, its face concealed amongst them. Only the fire continued unfazed, though had the party paid better attention, they might have noticed it burn a little faster, a little brighter. It was Luca the German who was once again the first to speak. Hello, he said, and the introduction of sound caused Davy, Charlie and Nadia to jump. Would you like to come in? We have a little whiskey. The eyes of the room turned slowly back to the figure outside. It seemed at first not to react, but as their vision adjusted to its shadowy mass, they perceived a slow, deliberate bowing motion. A concession, perhaps. You must be cold, said Maggie to the newcomer, though indeed she relished the cool chill of the night on her exposed forearms, fancying she could feel its fingers exploring her skin. Again the figure bowed, though whether it did in recognition or respect or out of sheer habit, she did not know. As the figure stepped inside, the rest of the group stepped away in tandem, pushed by the magnitude of its presence. Luca was first to snap from his reveries and turned to look for a whiskey bottle. Maggie gestured for the figure to take a seat by the fire. It followed her finger with its eyes, two marbles of drowning obsidian. Slowly, the figure turned back to Maggie, then to a corner of the room. There, the party saw, as if for the first time, a dank and dreary nook shelved into the back wall of the bothy. Somehow, not one of them had noticed this nook before. Certainly they would have remembered it if they had, for just to look at it singed the nostrils. The stonework in that corner had long ago been lost to the dark, congealing mould of damp rot, and now its seat was a living gallery of moss and fungi, fed by a steady trickle of fetid water which seeped in through a crack in the ceiling. The visitor looked back to Maggie, and in its lustrous pupils she felt herself falling, weightless and free, her mind expansive and expanding, intoxicated, taken. Her friends watched as she fawned, nodding her consent. Slowly this hunchback of furs trudged over to the corner of the bothy, its footsteps slapping on the stone, leaving small puddles in its wake. As it passed them, Davy, Charlie and Nadia recoiled at the stench. The smell wafting from the folds of the thing's overcoat arrested the senses. It stung their nostrils like ripe onion, causing their eyes to water. It was heavy and languorous, like it might clog the pores and slicken the skin with its grease. To each of the hikers, the aroma smelled a little different. It had the lingering quality of tuna brine and the acridity of freshly cut chili peppers. It was underscored, too, by a squalid dampness, like that of the nook toward which it was headed, and all these notes were mashed together with the repugnance of newly laid excrement. Luca frowned as the figure lumbered by him. Holding out a glass of whiskey as welcomingly as he could, he watched the figure reach out a hand, before seeming to suddenly change its mind. The look in its eyes made Luca's hair stand on end. With little regard for her friends, Maggie left the door ajar, wedged on the uneven flooring, and followed the figure further into the room. She inhaled deeply as its odour washed over her, closing her eyes, relishing the stench. The thing finally reached the bothy nook and lowered itself to the seat. More relaxed now than it had initially seemed, it leaned back, the downy growth of fungus squelching beneath it, and turned its face up to the trickling water. It sighed then, and as the tension in the room seemed momentarily wont to wane, the door swung shut with a bang. The party jumped. Davy screamed. Luca dropped the whiskey glass to smash on the stone floor. It was a moment before they realised that with the exit of night, so too had the being's stench left their nostrils. Nadia tentatively removed the cloth of her hijab from over her nose and clenched Charlie's bicep until her knuckles turned white. Nobody else moved. The adrenaline of fight or flight coursed their bodies, sometimes negating the effects of the psychedelic mushrooms, sometimes confusing and distorting them even further, accelerating the twisting vortexes of colour and sound, heightening the sensation of dissociation. The presence of the newcomer, though frightening, seemed to all non-negotiable. It was here, as they supposed, unquestioningly, it had always been. As the weary light from the fire flickered, each member of the group saw something different, resting in the horrid nook. According to later statements, this is what they saw. To Charlie and Nadia, the visitor assumed the guise of an old man, an ancient man, wrinkles etched into skin as deep as trenches or valleys. The skin itself grey with age. The old man was wrapped in layer upon layer of fur, heavy with moisture, all navy black and thick, with hairs long and matted. His hood covered most of his face, but where light broke the shadows, they saw that the man wore a long, silvered moustache, threadbare and pointed, his eyes glazed with cataracts above a nose flat and wide. The couple were afraid of the old man, who sat so perfectly still. But they were curious also. To Maggie Skellister, there were no words which could have done justice to the harmony achieved between colour and light, shape and shadow, softness and definition, which surrounded the figure. It seemed to Maggie that with each slight inflection or movement of the creature's massive frame, it took on a different image. At once, a woman of graceful amplitude, her black hair curling over naked bodice, while simultaneously a spirit of the forest, deep green and lustrous as the leaves of a rhododendron. In one instant, a massive raven, perched on the stonework in a riot of heaving feathers, its beak hooked and trembling with speech. In the next, a living statue of obsidian marble, polished and yet somehow worn, hewn of one perfectly large block, as fluid in preserved movement as the giant spiders of Louise Bourgeois. And no matter the incarnation, always those eyes, unbroken black, as endless as the universe, as captivating as the night sky, their gaze locked with hers, opening a channel of thought which communicated unspeakable love. To Maggie, The being was Narcissus, and she the reflective pool. For Big Davy, on the other hand, who was the most inebriated of the group, the thing in its watery hole visibly shuddered with energy, the sound of which roared in his eardrums like waves against the cliff. As such, its outline was blurry, impermanent. It was a mass of ugly, turgid fur, short black hairs curly and wet, shoulders hulking above the contorted musculature of its frame. It seethed. Horned and horny-toothed, it was a great bull, an ox, a boar with gills and fins and blubber which sloughed from it to pile on the floor in inky pools of melted black. From its sunken nostrils poured jets of condensing steam, and as the beast turned its eyes from Maggie to him, he felt the strength in his muscles falter. Its gaze was that of ivy to a tree, not just hungry, but boastful, greedy. Davy felt that the machinery in his chest could not maintain this eye contact for much longer, and yet he could not look away. He turned sheet white by the light of the fire. And then there was Luca, the German. Luca, who had not partaken of the hallucinogens. To Luca, the thing in the nuke was, quite clearly, a seal. Or, at least, now that it had moved into the light, it was clear that it was no human. Its head was smooth and bald, greying blue in hue. On its face it wore a set of silvered whiskers, a stubby snout, and eyes bulging and devoid of colour, which reminded Luca of the deepest sea. Its body was too large to be that of a seal's, but then so too was it overlarge for a grown man. Luca could not tell whether the sleek fur draped over its shoulders was a part of it or not. Though it clearly walked on 2 feet, Luca surmised that those feet probably did not resemble his own. Certainly the hand which had reached out toward his proffered whiskey had been more paw than hand, large and webbed and fingerless. Just a seal, thought Luca in a daze. But then the seal looked at him, and in his heart he heard the whisperings of 1,000 lost sons. The air in the bothy was still, lying heavy in the lungs of the campers. Few dared even to breathe for fear of attracting the attention of the horrid newcomer. Few except Maggie, who had moved silently to stand by its shoulder. Slowly, she reached out, trembling fingers imagining what they might feel, what they might discover among the lines of the being's many faces. Then suddenly, the thing spoke.
There will be time for that later, Maggie Callister.
Its voice seemed to come from every corner of the room. Mild, it betrayed little emotion of character, yet still it was captivating. Ancient without doubt, and weighted with the wisdom of many lives.
Your menfolk are frightened.
I told them your story, replied Maggie, her voice stirring her friends from their trance. Is she speaking to... began Nadia, feeling faint.
It is a frightful story,
said the Selkie of Beinn nam Caillte, a hint of playfulness in his voice.
And will they pose a problem?
Maggie thought about this for a second, ignoring the mounting confusion of her friends who, she suspected, were not privy to the Selkie's words. No problem, she said at last. They cannot tell truth from fiction.
Are you sure?
The Selkie looked not at Maggie, but into her, and she felt the tug of treachery in her chest. Her treachery, the treachery of one who has knowingly jilted a lover. In her peripheries, she caught sight of Luca, pulling his phone from his pocket with trembling hands.
"Oh shit," she cursed. I'm so sorry. I forgot. Him, he wasn't supposed to be here."
He can see me. Did you know that?
Maggie stared blankly at the creature.
Who is he?
The Selkie asked. Maggie's answer was immediate.
A stranger. A hiker. Nobody."
Luca heard her and began tapping at his phone even more urgently.
And has he eaten of the earth?
Maggie knew that the Selkie king meant the mushrooms. She hesitated before answering, shame feeding her heartache.
"No, I'm sorry. He didn't want..."
His vision is clear, and he has seen my true form, Maggie Scallister.
Pressed the Selkie, his words deliberately hard. Maggie felt suddenly close to tears. Her words stuck fast in her throat. But then the Selkie softened again.
Would you like to see me too, Maggie?
Now, like falling snow, the shape-shifting Selkie settled quietly into its natural shape, that which Luca had seen, revealing itself to the intoxicated Shetlander, who wept to see the beauty of the seal man. Around his sleek and watery body, her mind, clear now, saw the ripples his presence sent along the fabric of reality. The earthly form the Selkie took sent shivering waves of prismatic light toward the fringes of the ether, and as they passed through Maggie, she tingled with lust. Whilst their pal conducted her strange, one-sided conversation with the grotesque stranger, Charlie, Nadia and Davy shook themselves free of their petrification. Davy would still not turn his gaze back to the black beast, all smoke and horns, but at least now the thought of it did not completely freeze him to the spot. He saw Luca, taller and blonder than ever thanks to the strengthening effects of the mushrooms, doing something with his phone. His mouth dry and sticky, Davy finally found his voice.
What you up to, Luca, my pal?"
Luca looked ill. The weed had fully caught up with him, and now the sober region of his mind was drowning. He turned to Davy, who did not look too good himself.
I tried to phone someone, but no service."
Davy cursed, thought a moment, then tiptoed toward his bag. From it, he produced his final tinny of tenants. Cracking it open, he slurped the golden nectar down loudly, draining half the can in a single go. The big man sat back down in his seat, bemused and bewildered, and allowed the lager to wash his anxieties away. Luca choked back a sob.
"Just a trip. Just a bad trip."
In the other corner of the room, back by the struggling fire, Charlie rocked on his heels.
"Just a bad trip. Just a trip."
Nadia squeezed tighter on his arm, and he looked up into her eyes, saw the worry there.
"Just a trip, baby. Just a trip."
"Cha," whispered Nadia.
"This can't be a trip, man. Just look at that fucking thing. Just look at it."
But Charlie would not be deterred.
"Trust me, Nadia Jalal. It'll pass. It's got to. Just got to. Gotta keep going."
But he trailed off. Confused, high, and still far from sure what in the hell was actually going on, Nadia mustered her courage. She turned to Maggie, stood just inches from the strange old man with the white whiskers. The pair's eyes locked, neither of them blinking.
"Mags?"
said Nadia.
"Mags, are you talking to him? Is he talking, Mags? Mags, what's he saying?"
But Maggie no longer had ears for anyone but the king. resplendent on his throne of emerald and burnished silver. She was the king's court, his emissary, his advisor and his herald, and the king had further questions for her. Questions about the German boy.
Did he come alone?
Yes.
Will he be missed?
I don't know.
Will you miss him?
No.
Then will you deal with him for me, Maggie? For us?
Yes. The Selkie reached out his paw and lightly touched the back of Maggie's hand.
Then you were lucky to meet him on the path. Your friends will no longer be needed.
His paw was soft and warm, slick with the mossy dampness of the nook. 5 claws, cold and smooth to a scalpel point, gently grazed the Shetlander's skin. Though the touch lasted only a fraction of a second, it filled Maggie Skellister with a joy she could not have previously known was possible. Up her spine shot an icy thrill of pleasure, and in the flesh behind her stomach moved the machinery of life. Maggie Skellister had known of her desire since first she'd laid eyes on the old king, last summer, on a hiking trip with her parents. In fact, it was they who told her the old Shetlandic folktale in the first place, of the merwife of Unst, and of the Selkie king banished from his kingdom. It was they who, despite their Christian aversion to pagan lore, had insisted that they go looking for the loch in the lee of Beinn na Caillte. And there, in the dark, unmoving waters, the king had revealed himself to her. There he had come to her, in a vision in her sleep, hauntingly beautiful, with eyes like the petroleum tails of magpies. She recalled waking in the midnight, her bedding damp, her body quivering. She recalled the ache she'd felt for the Selkie then, and the desperation to sate it. But never could she have guessed the euphoria which his actual touch would invoke. And how could she? His touch was transcendent. As their skin met, time flattened, and through its wafer skein, Maggie saw all of the life her king had lived, all of the lives he had made one. She saw moons rise and fall weeping among the heather, to rise again in burning globes of orange, yellow, ivory white. She saw mountains march, rivers ebb, huge unyielding glaciers carve valleys from the land, like our father would whittle trinkets from wood. She saw burning starlight roar and erode, fading above the neon glow of expanding cities. She saw the landscape awash with mighty pine and oak, burn and fall and crumple into barren hillsides, then come alive again in purple heather. She saw the bothy, her bothy, his bothy, built up layer by layer, watched its buttery light flick on and off 1,000 times so fast it twinkled like the light of a distant planet. She watched it fall into disrepair. And through it all she saw the water of the loch, perfectly still, deeper than sunlight, never growing, never shrinking. And feeling drawn, she allowed herself to be pulled beneath the surface. Then, as quickly as it came, the vision vanished as the Selkie withdrew his paw. Maggie Skellister gasped for breath, a sob in her throat. It was all she could do not to wail. Her heart had been broken in 2.
Patience, my love,
whispered the Selkie.
our time is close.
And then the king winked, and the bothy fell into darkness.
The search for the two missing hikers enters its third day today. Maggie Skellister, 28, and Luca Dietrich, 34, a native of Germany, were last seen camping with friends Nadia Jalal, David Crooks, and Charlie Moffat in the Scottish Highlands, on a Munro known to locals as the Mountain of Lost Sons, a mountain with a reputation for unsolved disappearances. The friends, who were the first to report the persons as missing, are currently being held in custody as suspects in a case police officials suggest may be rife with foul play. The arrests were made after the three suspects provided wildly varying accounts of their night spent with the missing hikers. Toxicology reports indicate that high levels of the hallucinogenic drug psilocybin were found present in all three of the suspects' bloodstreams, a drug known to induce psychosis, a dissociative state in which individuals are unable to determine what is real and what is not. Following the failure of mountain rescue divers to locate any evidence beneath the waters of the mountain's largest lake, the search has since turned to the moorland around the summit. Earlier, we spoke once again with the family of Maggie Skellister. We learned of a previous trip Miss Skellister had made to the region on a family holiday in the summer of 2021. Mrs. Skellister told our reporters that her daughter was already familiar with the area and was an experienced hiker. As such, Mrs. Skellister believes her daughter Maggie could not have become lost. The family of Luca Dietrich declined to give statement. Pressure mounts on Police Scotland to locate Maggie Skellister and Luca Dietrich, or to extract some more reliable information from the suspects in custody. Those in the area around Beinn Caillte are urged to come forward if they have any information pertaining to the disappearances. In other news, a dramatic increase in seal sightings in the River Thames has brightened up the morning commute considerably. According to one financial sector worker, the sight of their bobbing heads and shining eyes has him actually looking forward to going to work. Light from the window of the bothy falls, as does candlelight from a cracked lantern. Spilling through narrow stonework, it cuts a weak shard across the moorland, blooming heather and soft pockets of winter snow shying from its luminescence. Where the light peters out, the loch begins. Sleek as sealskin, the surface of the water is dark and oily, a thin film of scum discolouring its edges. Plunge beneath the surface and you would be fooled into thinking the loch was empty, too still and stagnant to host life. It is deep, deeper than your lungs could take you, and yet nothing rises from the depths. No bubbles of air, no animal matter, no plant life, nothing. But your eyes deceive you, for the loch is fuller of life than you could possibly imagine. Many lives, in fact, comprise the silty mulch on the bed of this lagoon, tethered there by time and the will of the loch's inhabitant. Out of reach of the sun's rays, in the furthest depths of those waters, there abides an ancient king. His throne is made of 1,000 skins, which he would wear to fool you, trick you, entice you into his lair, his watery kingdom. Legend has it that he once surfaced in his true guise, mottled fur battle-scarred and soft grey to the touch, black snout wet and pretty with whiskers, his flippers and paws padding at the peaty earth. He came then for a woman, and made her his queen. And as the story goes, with her by his side, his thirst for human flesh was at long last quenched. So enthralled were they with each other's beauty, wisdom, and cunning. On the banks of a mountain called Beinn Caillte lies a loch by a bothy, and every year bouquets of wildflower are laid in memoriam by the door of the crumbling hut. And every year those mournful flowers soon disappear. And every year, come summer, if you're lucky enough, you might just see petals floating atop the still surface of the loch. And if you look close, hard,
You might even see them rise from the depths, as if the world were inverted, and they were snowflakes, fallen from the clouds. Thank you for listening to Stories from the Hearth. Special thanks this month go to my good pal Ali Beg for help with the pronunciation, grammar and spelling of the Gaelic for Beinn na mhic Caillte, which means the mountain of lost sons. Without him, it would have meant something very different, or indeed nothing at all. With today's story, I wanted to try my hand at horror. I've never really written horror, and maybe that shows. I definitely tried to weave a little bit of comedic relief into this story as well, and I also tried to write something close to the heart. I often try to write things that are fantastical as worlds into which I can escape, as well as for worlds into which you can escape. But for this one I wanted to write something that was familiar to me, namely hiking and camping with friends, and friends who are these kind of ridiculously exaggerated Scottish characters. I wanted to try and do something that was a bit of a bottle episode, two all happening in this one location with real focus on the characters themselves, especially that of the Selkie King once he comes in. You know, I really wanted to create a sense of menace just around this distortion of how he is perceived by the various characters that I'd created. Of course, I had to chuck in some drug use there too, because what good is a Halloween story if not one in which the heroes are too inebriated to really do anything about it? And that obviously comes into play at the end there too, where their mushroom use is used by the broadcaster to kind of blame them, and by the police to kind of blame them for Maggie and Luca's disappearance. I really hope you liked today's story. I had a lot of fun writing it. I'm really glad that I got to do something horror themed, because I really do love Halloween. My partner and I have spent this month watching classic Halloween movies, decorating the apartment and being as spooky as we can. And in fact, this morning, if all goes to plan, I should be very, very hungover right now after a Halloween party out in Glasgow. Perhaps you are too, and that's why you're here, getting a good story to soothe that hungover head of yours. If you liked what you heard today, please do follow this podcast on whatever podcast app it is that you're using. Share it with friends, family, and anyone else you know who could use just a half hour to an hour's respite from the chaos of the everyday. If you wish to support the podcast, like I said in the introduction, please do head to my Patreon by hitting the link in the description. I urge you to do this only if you find genuine value in my art. I'm not trying to get everybody that listens to this thing to pay for it. It should be free, that's the point of it. But if you feel like what it gives you is something worth paying for or worth showing your support for, then please do help me out. Any which way you can helps hugely, because I do this all in my spare time whilst trying to make money through other avenues until this might one day become its own self-sufficient thing. Speaking of Patreon, a further shout out and thank you to 5 more of my top tier patrons, to Rob, Charlie, Vivian, Sandy and Jane. Thank you all so much. If you've got any feedback, any opinions, or you'd like to get in touch, then you can check out the podcast's Instagram, Twitter, and website via the links below. Story episodes are released once a month, with the next episode out on Sunday the 28th of November. However, do keep your eyes out for additional episodes in my mini-series The Wandering Bard, which is a series looking at the history of storytelling and the people behind it. They are out on the second Sunday of every month. Until next time, I've been Callum Bannerman, and you've been listening to Stories from the Hearth.